From 4 men on a camping trip, being followed by a beam of light, all experiencing intense dreams of being experimented on by alien beings, to police officers having their whole squad cars engulfed in strange lights from the sky and forgetting huge stretches of time. These are terrifying alien abduction stories governments tried to cover up. In August of 1976, 4 men went on a camping trip in the Allagash Wilderness in Maine. Jack and Jim Weiner, along with Chuck Rack and Charlie Foltz, were off on what was supposed to be this peaceful getaway when things took a turn. On their second night, Jim spotted a bright object in the sky. It was there for about 30 seconds, then it disappeared. Not super out of the ordinary in the deep woods, the sky is just lit up with stars at night. Easy to misidentify things, but 2 nights later, while they were out fishing, the same bright object appeared a second time. Chuck noticed it at first. It looked super intense. This time, it was almost like the sun, they said, and they watched it as it followed them along the water. Charlie, thinking it was some kind of signal, even tried to flash an SOS to the object. And that's when things got really weird. They described this light shooting a beam down towards them, which followed them all the way back to shore. And when they got back to their campsite, something else was off. The fire they'd left burning was completely out, and they felt totally exhausted, like they'd been gone for hours. The next few days were uneventful, and they didn't see the light again, but after they got back home, the men started having these disturbing nightmares, often about sitting naked on a bench, feeling afraid. That night stuck with the men, but it wasn't until 1988 that they finally had enough and decided to seek out answers. Jim reached out to UFO researcher Ray Fowler, and they all agreed to undergo hypnosis to try and make sense of these strange memories. And under this hypnosis, each man recalled being abducted by aliens. They described terrifying beings practicing medical exams on them, even having their skin and bodily fluids taken. Later, when they compared notes, they realized that their memories matched up exactly. They even passed polygraph tests. On the night of October 11th, 1973, in Pascagoula, Mississippi, 2 men, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, had a terrifying encounter they were never able to explain. While fishing off a pier by the Pascagoula River, they heard a strange whirring sound and saw flashing blue lights. Next thing they knew, an oval-shaped object about 30 to 40 feet across appeared above them. They were completely paralyzed as 3 bizarre creatures with robotic slit mouths and crab-like pincers took them aboard the craft. Once inside, Hickson and Parker claimed the creatures performed some kind of examination on them. They both stayed silent for years about the details, but Hickson eventually opened up, even writing a book in 1983 about the encounter. Parker was quieter at first, but started attending UFO conventions, and in 2018, he released his own book, giving his side of the story for the first time. In 2019, the site of the abduction was marked with a plaque to honor the event, and Parker, deeply emotional, said he wanted to be buried there someday. Hickson passed away in 2011, but Parker continued to speak about the encounter until his death in 2023. Of course, some say the 2 made this story up, but what if they didn't? What if something actually happened to these 2 men that they were never able to forget? And writing it all down and sharing their story with the world was their only way of working through something that they couldn't even begin to understand. In 1979, Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson from Marshall County, Minnesota, had a strange encounter while on patrol. On the night of August 27th, around 2 a.m., he saw a beam of light just above the road near Stephen, Minnesota. The light shot toward him and engulfed his squad car. Johnson reported hearing glass breaking before losing consciousness. When he came to, 39 minutes had passed. The car's windshield was shattered, one of the headlights and the red emergency light were damaged, and the radio antenna was bent. When backup deputies arrived, they found Johnson's squad car sideways on the road. He had bruises and eye irritation, which a doctor later compared to burns from a welder's torch. When Johnson's story came out, it gained a lot of attention. All it did was make matters worse, though. Johnson would later say it, understandably, caused a lot of emotional distress for him and his family. Till this day, nobody knows exactly what happened that night, but part of me wonders if he just got into a car accident and was too embarrassed to admit it. Not to ruin the party or anything, but I don't know. What do you all think of this one? This next one is really weird, so strap in. So in 1957, a Brazilian farmer named Antonio Vilas-Boas had one of the craziest nights of his life. On October 15th, while working late in the fields, he spotted this bright red star-like object in the sky. The object came down, eventually landing. It was an egg-shaped craft, and from it came these humanoid figures. They were about 5 feet tall with small blue eyes and white hair, and they were dressed in what looked like these gray overalls or equipment, and they had these helmets on. Before he knew it, Antonio was grabbed and taken aboard the craft. Once inside, the aliens took samples of his bodily fluids and performed a whole series of other medical examinations. Then they led him into another room, where he was introduced to a female humanoid, according to him, a very attractive one. He described her as having small round eyes, white hair, and a human-like appearance. And after some strange interactions, you can guess what happened next. And once the bizarre encounter was over, the craft released him back into the field and took off. Antonio, understandably shaken, eventually told his family about it. Not sure how that conversation would have gone, but I'm gonna assume it was awkward. His story soon caught the attention of the Brazilian military and the media. People had a lot of questions. Some thought his story was incredible. Some just laughed him off. But Antonio stuck by his story all the way up until his death in 1991. On September 3rd of 1965, 18-year-old Norman Muscarello was hitchhiking home along Route 150 in New Hampshire. Around 2 a.m., he saw 5 bright red lights hovering above the trees. At first he thought they were police or fire lights, but when he got closer he realized the lights were coming from a massive object around 80 to 90 feet wide, but somehow was completely silent. Panicking, he drove into a ditch and watched in horror as this object started moving toward him before changing direction and hovering over a nearby farmhouse. Norman ran to a neighbor's house for help, but he got no response. Eventually he flagged down a car and was driven to the local police station, where he told Officer Reginald Toland about what he saw. Toland was already familiar with Muscarello and he took him seriously. He radioed Officer Eugene Bertrand to investigate, and when they went back to the sighting location, the object did appear again, hovering silently and rocking back and forth. The officers just stood there completely stunned, not knowing what to do, before the thing disappeared. After the police reported the incident, the Air Force investigated, but their helpful explanation was that it was just stars or a military exercise. Muscarello and the officers weren't so convinced, nor are a lot of people who've heard about the story in the years since. In 1961, Betty and Barney Hill, a couple from New Hampshire, became one of the most famous cases of alien abduction. After a vacation, they were driving home when they noticed this strange light in the sky. At first, Betty thought it was a falling star, but it moved erratically and it was getting larger and brighter. Eventually, Barney decided to just pull over so they could take a look. As they watched, Betty saw some sort of craft with multicolored lights moving across the moon. They continued to stare for a while, but what happened next nearly gave them a heart attack. Suddenly, the craft dropped down toward their car and just hovered above it. Barney stepped out and, using binoculars, he looked up to see a bunch of what he said were humanoid figures inside this craft. One figure seemed to communicate with him telepathically, warning him to stay where he was. Terrified, Barney ran back to the car and the couple just sped off. As they drove away, they heard a strange beeping sound, and then they lost track of time, suddenly finding themselves near Concord hours later than they'd expected. When they got home, they noticed other odd things too. Their clothes were damaged, their watches had stopped working, and there was a strange pink powder on Betty's dress. The Hills couldn't explain what had happened, and both underwent hypnosis sessions later on, which revealed eerie, consistent memories of an alien abduction. On December 1st, 1987, a retired police officer known only as Spencer to the press was out for a walk in Ilkley Moor in England. While climbing a small hill, he saw a strange figure ahead of him, about 4 feet tall, dark green, with an oversized head and long, thin arms. The figure made a gesture that seemed to warn Spencer to stay back, but instead he took out his camera and he snapped a photo. The creature then ran off. Spencer followed but lost track of it in the fog. That's when Spencer saw a craft rise from the moor. He said it had 2 saucer-shaped parts stacked on top of each other, and that it hummed loudly as it disappeared into the sky. At this point, Spencer decided that his walk was over and he started heading to town, only to realize he was hours later than he should have been. His compass was also pointing in the wrong direction. In the days that followed, Spencer reached out to UFO researchers Jenny Randalls and Peter Howe. photograph Spencer took was examined by experts, and while it couldn't be proven to be fake, it was also too grainy for any real conclusion either. According to UFOologist Nick Redfern, Spencer was also visited by two men in black who apparently intimidated him into staying silent. On the night of August 21st, 1955, in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, a bizarre incident took place that has gone down as one of the craziest cryptid reports of all time, at least that I've read about. A group of 12 people who'd been staying at their small family farm rushed to the local police station saying that they had been under attack by small, alien-looking creatures. They claimed these creatures were about 3 to 4 feet tall and were peeking into their farmhouse windows and doorways, and that they'd been fighting them off for hours. And this all happened after they saw some weird light descend into the trees by the farmhouse. So two adults, Elmer Sutton and Billy Ray Taylor, described seeing short, dark figures popping up and even tried to hold them off with gunfire. Soon police, state troopers, and military personnel from nearby Fort Campbell showed up to investigate. What they found were signs of gunfire and holes in the farmhouse's windows and door screens, but no sign of any creatures. The following day, the family packed up and they left the farmhouse. The mysterious creatures were never seen again. November of 1979, Robert Taylor, a forestry worker from Scotland, had an encounter that left him badly shaken and injured. Taylor had gone for a walk near Dutchmont Law, a wooded area in Livingston, when he'd claimed to see a strange flying dome. He described the object as a large metallic sphere about 7 yards in diameter, hovering above the ground. It also had a rough sandpaper-like texture and small propellers on its rim. According to Taylor, the thing sprouted smaller spheres, which he compared to sea mines, that started dragging him toward the larger object. Then everything went black. When he came to, the strange craft and smaller objects were gone. Taylor tried to start his truck, but it wasn't working, so he walked home. When he got home, his wife was in shock. Taylor was disheveled, his clothes were torn, and he had grazes on his chin and thighs. The police were called, and after examining the site, they found odd marks in the ground, which Taylor said were caused by these strange objects. Finally, in November of 1980, Alan Godfrey, a police constable in West Yorkshire, was responding to reports of cattle roaming a council estate when he saw this strange diamond-shaped light hovering above the road. It was about 20 feet high and 14 feet wide, rotating slowly. He tried to radio for backup, but his equipment suddenly wasn't working. And then, just like that, the object vanished. Godfrey found himself 30 yards down the road. He was unable to explain where the last 30 minutes had gone. He also had a split boot and a strange red mark on his foot. Later, under hypnosis, Godfrey recalled being hit by a beam of light, causing him to lose consciousness. He remembered then waking up inside a room being examined by small, non-human beings and a more humanoid figure. Godfrey would later say it was possible the whole thing was a dream, but at the time, he felt very strongly that what he experienced was real. He also thought the experience led to his early retirement from the police force. With all that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.